Washington Commanders offensive coordinator Kliff Kingsbury has plenty of familiarity with Caleb Williams, but I don't think that's going to be as big of an advantage as you might think. And it's still going to be an exciting chess match between Kingsbury's offense and Matt Eberflus's defense.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, we're going to explore the role of Kliff Kingsbury's previous experience and relationship with Caleb Williams and how that might affect this game, maybe less than you might think. We'll look at how Matt Eberflus gets to play a little bit of the chess match here with Kingsbury's offense and Eberflus's defense, and how the Bears have been pretty darn good at that coming out of the bye week with an extra week to prepare. And we'll also touch on the injury report this week, where the Bears looking like, again, going to miss a couple of key players in their secondary that could play a really big role in what Washington tries to attack and what Chicago tries to defend. But I think as you think about these matchups, as we take the Jayden Daniels narrative out of it, as it looks more and more like Jayden Daniels is not going to play, the next sort of narrative step everyone has moved on to is Kliff Kingsbury and Caleb Williams, the connection there, as opposed to the Jayden Daniels Caleb Williams duel that we were planning on having as the big storyline for this game. Of course, for those who don't know, Kliff Kingsbury was a senior offensive analyst last year at USC with Caleb Williams. It's part of why the Bears interviewed Kliff Kingsbury to be their offensive coordinator, ultimately opting for Shane Waldron instead, but was in that conversation partially to get his thoughts on drafting Caleb Williams and what his perspective was there. It was a sort of a dual effort there. And so Kliff Kingsbury was, asked about a lot of these connections in the lead up to this game, and I think they have a sense of how that connection can be a storyline here, but also be overblown as a storyline here. That, yes, there's some familiarity, but how much that actually applies to an NFL game on two different teams in a new offense for Caleb Williams and the kind of development Caleb Williams has had, it can only go so far. So here's how Caleb Williams described, or excuse me, here's how Kliff Kingsbury described some of his relationship with Caleb Williams and how that has sort of shaped things here moving forward.
What did you take from your time with Caleb, and what have you seen from him so far at the pro level?
Yeah, tremendous person, competitor, freaky talent. Watching the stuff you do in practice and in the games, his ability, his feel, really, really special. I mean, he's going to be one of the top guys in the league for a lot of years, and so that was cool to get to spend time with him last year.
You also interviewed for the Bears OC job. What was that experience like? Not going to get into that. Yeah, sorry.
When you were at USC, I guess Caleb said that part of what you were doing there is helping him kind of get ready to prepare for the NFL. So on a daily basis, what were some of the things that you were doing with him to help in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of a resource there as much as I could be. That was the good thing. Lincoln allowed me to be the good cop, and any knowledge, anything I could share, particularly with him. And we all knew where he was going, and it was kind of a foregone conclusion that he'd be the first pick for a long time. So really just a resource in any way that I could be, helping him, trying to mentally prepare for the things that were ahead.
And then what kind of, how often would you meet with him, and then what things did you learn about him through that process? Yeah,
I was there, all day, every day. I mean, I worked there, so all the meetings I was in, out of practice, so it was like being a full-time coach, just getting to do all the good stuff. And like I said, just a tremendous competitor, wants to be great, works at it, and just insane talent. Some of the freaky, like Mahomes type throws he can make, and the vision, extending plays, the things he can do, and throw off platform was really unique.
I certainly have a couple of questions about, why he didn't want to answer the offensive coordinator interview there. It's hard not to try and read between the lines and make assumptions there that probably don't have much evidence to them. Whether did he feel like it was illegitimate that they weren't really interested in him in an offensive coordinator? Did he feel used as just a search for Caleb Williams, or maybe he just thought, I don't know. I don't know. We don't need to spend too much time thinking about that. But the bigger picture question here of like, okay, yeah, he was heavily involved in Caleb Williams's meetings and at practice with him at USC. It's worth noting USC didn't have an official quarterbacks coach on their coaching staff last year with Caleb Williams, so the feeling was kind of like Kliff Kingsbury was sort of like the de facto quarterbacks coach, but of course, Lincoln Riley's involved with that. They have an offensive coordinator. They had a passing game coordinator, so it wasn't like it was all Kliff Kingsbury in that. So that's where you can find the connections and think, okay, well then Kliff Kingsbury probably has some ideas of the way Caleb Williams prefers to throw certain routes, and maybe the tendencies to, roll this way versus this kind of pressure, or roll that way versus that kind of pressure, that perhaps Kingsbury could provide to his defense in Washington to have them better prepared to take on Caleb Williams this week in against Chicago. And I think there certainly are some things Kliff could help them with, but because Caleb Williams is in a totally different offense, and because you don't know exactly what the play call is going to be. It's like, okay, if Kliff Kingsbury knows that Caleb Williams prefers to throw this kind of route in that kind of situation, well, you don't know if the Bears offense is going to call that kind of route in that kind of situation. So you can have that knowledge and try and guess, but like if they don't do it, then that knowledge doesn't really end up helping you at all. So like I'm sure there are little things, that little tendencies or little preferences that Kliff might know about Caleb that, hey, he can give the defensive lineman a tip and say, hey, when Caleb feels the pressure from that side, he's going to try and duck this way, or he tends to spin that way. And maybe something like that can be a small little nugget of information. But bigger picture wise, Kliff Kingsbury's knowledge of Caleb Williams isn't going to be the reason Washington wins or loses the game, right? Like, could it make it 1% better for them? Sure. But the Bears should be more than 1% better than the Washington Commanders. Like, if this Bears team is going to be as good as we think they are, and prove that the wins over bad teams were no flukes and that they're actually legitimately a good team, then the 1% boost or whatever they might have from Kliff Kingsbury's Caleb Williams knowledge isn't going to move the needle a ton in a game like this. Like, Kliff Kingsbury is not the Washington defensive coordinator. They're not gonna shape their defensive play calling based on a couple of tips that Kliff Kingsbury gets them about Caleb Williams, because some of Caleb Williams' preferences at USC may have been based on the offensive line he had there, the receivers he had there, the play calling and the play structures that he had there. And so with different offensive linemen, different receivers, different plays, different passing concepts in Chicago, he may have different preferences and different tendencies. So just because Caleb Williams likes some things one way at USC doesn't mean he's going to like them the exact same way with the Bears. And so they're going to scout the Bears tape just like they would any other team, and you can pick up tendencies on the Bears tape, but it's not as though Kliff Kingsbury has some secret kryptonite for Caleb Williams that he's going to uncover that he can give to his defense that's just going to shut down everything the Bears want to do on offense. That's not going to be the case. It's going to be a lot closer to just a regular matchup between a smart offensive coordinator who's doing a good job in Kliff Kingsbury against a smart defensive play caller who's doing a good job in Matt Eberflus. And that's where a lot of the chess match is going to come. The difference is the Bears have had an extra week to prepare with the bye week. And we've seen under Matt Eberflus, Chicago plays particularly well coming out of the bye week. So I want to look at how that's trended over the last couple of years to set the stage for what we should expect in Washington next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks puts you in complete control. They set stat projections for players, and you choose whether they will get more or less than their PrizePicks projections. And if you pick two or more players correctly, you can win up to 100 times your money. So you could pick for Caleb Williams in this week's game against Washington. The PrizePicks projection for his passing yards is 228.5. His own rushing yards are 19.5. Cole Kmet's at 37.5 receiving yards. DJ Moore's at 57.5 receiving yards. So you pick a couple players, more or less on PrizePicks, and you can win big. It's a lot of fun and gives you more control over your outcome than other daily fantasy platforms where your lineup is competing against other people's lineups, and whether you win or lose depends on what they do. This is just you versus the stat projections. So check it out by downloading the PrizePicks app and using our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. So whether your picks are right or wrong, PrizePicks is still going to give you an extra $50 after you place that first $5 lineup when you download the app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, run your game. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by our friends at Zbiotics. Zbiotics is the maker of a new pre-alcohol probiotic that's genetically engineered to help you feel better the next day after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut, and it's that byproduct that's to blame for your rough next day. But pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks that byproduct down so that you'll feel your best the next day. The way it works is you drink pre-alcohol as your first drink of the night with food to make sure it gets absorbed properly in your stomach. Then drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. And then step 3, enjoy tomorrow. You can wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use our promo code LockedOnNFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Just remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use our code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. The Chicago Bears have been surprisingly good. The Chicago Bears have been surprisingly good coming out of the bye week under Matt Eberflus. And I think I say surprising because they seemed consistently bad under under Matt Nagy in the prior regime. And so given how the Bears had struggled early on under Matt Eberflus, I think there was this expectation of like, are they just going to keep struggling again out of the bye week? But in both Matt Eberflus seasons so far, the Bears have played well in the first game after having some extra time off. They haven't been overly rusty, and the extra time to prepare has allowed this coaching staff to self-scout more, break a lot of their own tendencies, and also be extra prepared for the opponent immediately coming out of the break, that they've had extra days to watch and learn and implement strategies to defeat that team. And that's what's got me feeling optimistic about this Bears team coming out of the bye week against the Washington Commanders. Because if you think back to last year, the Bears had their bye week. The last couple of years, they've been late in the season. Last year, it was week 13. The Bears had just beaten the Minnesota Vikings in kind of an ugly game where, they couldn't get much going in the ground, but DJ Moore had a big game, and they picked off Josh Dobbs 4 times, but the offense was just kind of meh. It was 12-10 kind of finish, and they kind of stumbled into the bye week. But they came out against the Detroit Lions, I believe the first place Detroit Lions at the time, and whooped them. Came out, got a 10-0 lead in the first quarter. The Lions climbed back in the second quarter and actually took the lead, but then the Bears absolutely pulled away in the second half, and it was 28-13 final. Remember, we had that feeling like that Matt Eberflus had kind of figured out the Ben Johnson offense. They just played the Lions really close like 2 weeks earlier and almost won that game if it wasn't for a late Lions touchdown that pulled ahead with 30 seconds left in the game. But you felt like, man, the Bears were so close there and just kind of blew it. And so how are they going to do the second time around after the bye week? They absolutely demolished them. And I think it's what gives us confidence in this Bears team this year when they have to face the Lions. Feeling like Matt Eberflus has been able to get the better of Ben Johnson once, and really for a game and a half or a game and 3 quarters. Just they lost the first one, but absolutely dominated the second one, kind of on both sides of the ball. It wasn't that Justin Fields in that game last year threw for 400 yards and a bunch of touchdowns or anything, but like they were able to move the ball fairly consistently on offense. Took care of the ball, got the running game going a little bit, and of course, scored plenty of points with pretty good ease against Detroit to feel like, man, they were clicking in that one. Like it was as easy as it had felt all season. And you got pressure from a number of different places in that game. Justin Jones, Montez Sweat, Unique Ngakoue, Javon Dexter all got sacks in there. Jaquan Brisker had like some crazy number of tackles and was flying all over the field. It just felt like the Bears had found some real answers after having that time off in the bye week. And it followed what they had done the year before against the Philadelphia Eagles, where, yes, if you're playing along at home, you may remember they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles out of that bye week. Another late bye week. I think was that also a week 13 bye week? It was week 14 bye week. So at the very end of the year, the Bears had lost 6 games entering the bye week and still lost out of the bye week, but played a first place Philadelphia Eagles team closer than they had any business playing them. You might remember the Eagles came into that game 12-1. They were one of the hottest teams in football. They would go on to go to the Super Bowl and lose to the Chiefs in 2022. The Bears played a Super Bowl team, the best team in the NFC conference coming out of the bye week in 2022, when the Bears had won like 3 games all year and took an early 3-6 lead, climbed back into the game, made it a 4-point game in the third quarter, and then a 5-point game again at the end of the fourth quarter. And not that I think the Eagles were super scared of losing, but it was like that game was supposed to be Eagles blowout bad Bears team, dominating Eagles team, really bad Bears team. That game wasn't supposed to be close. And the fact that the Bears not only led at some point in the game, but kept it close down to the very end spoke highly of how well the Bears were able to prepare. They intercepted Jalen Hurts twice and didn't allow him a passing touchdown. He rushed for a few there. And like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith had big games, but it wasn't like the Eagles were putting up a ton of points on them. It was 25, and one of those touchdowns came later in the fourth quarter. They held them to 17 for the majority of that game. But Justin Fields threw for a couple touchdowns in that game, rushed for almost 100 yards. David Montgomery had a good rushing game in that one as well. And like most importantly, that Bears team that played the Eagles close in that one was like horrendous talent-wise. If you look back at the lineup, the Bears trotted out there against, again, the best team in the NFC. The Bears played the best team in the NFC really close with a lineup that included wide receivers Dante Pettis and Equanimous St. Brown starting on the outside, Velus Jones starting in the slot at wide receiver there. Riley Reiff was your starting right tackle in that game. And then like your defense, holy moly. I mean, to hold the Eagles to 17 points for most of that game and only 25 overall when they were like the number one offense, their defensive line was Trevis Gibson and Dominique Robinson were starting at your defensive end spots. Trevis Gibson and Dominique Robinson, a player who was cut and a player who's currently a healthy scratch on your team, were your starting defensive ends. And Armon Watts started at defensive tackle against that Eagles team. Your linebackers were Nick Morrow and Jack Sanborn and Joe Thomas ended up playing a lot in that game at linebacker as well. And you starting DeAndre Houston Carson at safety next to Jaquan Brisker because Eddie Jackson was hurt. So you had like maybe 3 or 4 starting caliber defensive players, 0 starting caliber wide receivers, and maybe 3 or 4 starting caliber offensive linemen in that game. And they still found a way to play a really good Philadelphia Eagles team really close throughout the course of that contest. And so that's where you can come into this game against the Washington Commanders and say, boy, Matt Eberflus is going to have a good plan for Washington. It doesn't guarantee a Bears victory, just like it didn't guarantee a victory over the Eagles. But like, if they could play that well with a terrible team against the Eagles, and they could beat the Lions last year that well against a good Lions team with a better roster, you would think they'll come into Washington here with a really good plan that you can feel comfortable about coming out of the bye week here, even with the injuries the Bears are still dealing with in the secondary. Because as the injury report has gone on this week, it's looking like the Bears are going to be missing a couple of key starters on the back end, and a few other players are going to be banged up. So even though Washington is likely to be missing Jayden Daniels, the Bears are going to be missing some pieces too. So we come back to how well the two coaches, offensive and defensive wise, are going to adapt here to what they're missing and what the other team is missing. So we'll kind of take a look at where the injuries stand this week and how that affects game planning on both sides next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And FanDuel wants to get your football season rolling with a big return because right now they're going to give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you can bet $5 on anything, any sport, or this Bears-Commanders game, for example, where the Bears are 2.5-point favorites on the road. The money line is Bears minus 142 straight up, and the over-under is set at 43.5. You can also bet on college football, basketball. I guess now the WNBA finals are over, so you can't bet on that, but hockey, tennis, soccer, boxing, all the combat sports, the World Series as well, you name it. They've got it all on FanDuel, all in their app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So to get your $200 in guaranteed bonus bets, win or lose, place your $5 bet at FanDuel.com or download America's #1 sportsbook. The Bears had been really healthy for the majority of the season, and now we're starting to see injuries catch up. We had hoped that the bye week would help them get a little healthier, and it has in some ways. Got a couple players working their way off of injured reserve now, but a couple of the players that got hurt in London or prior to heading to London aren't quite ready to go just yet, and barring something changing on Friday as this podcast comes out, I think the Bears will be missing 2 starters in the secondary with some other guys maybe a little less than 100% on the back end. So let's start there, right? So far through the first 2 days of practice this week, Jaquan Brisker at safety and Kyler Gordon in the slot, neither one has been able to practice. Brisker is still recovering from his concussion. Kyler Gordon suffered a hamstring injury against the Jaguars 2 weeks ago now in London. Given that they missed the first 2 days of practice, it's possible they could come back on Friday, practice, and be questionable and play on Sunday. But at this point, I think we're better off assuming that they're not going to play. In the same sense that Jayden Daniels hasn't practiced Wednesday or Thursday and is not likely to play then either. So that means another game of Elijah Hicks starting at safety with Kevin Byard and Josh Blackwell starting in the slot in place of Kyler Gordon. The rest of the roster, guys were limited on Wednesday but came back full on Thursday, so you're feeling pretty good about the long snapper Scott Daly's going to be ready to go. Defensive tackle Zach Pickens looks like he could be ready to go, coming back from his groin injury, so you could have some more defensive tackle depth. And same with cornerback Terrell Smith, one of the backups there, has been out with a hip injury for a few weeks. He was a full participant on Thursday, so he should be back and give you a little bit more cornerback depth. Then there are 3 guys on injured reserve that have opened their practice window that are back practicing in full as well that could come back in the mix. Larry Borum on the offensive line, full participant from his ankle injury. Travis Homer, the running back, full participant from finger surgery he had. I believe it was surgery. And then defensive end Jake Martin, who missed all of training camp and the preseason with a toe injury. He is a full participant. I don't know if he's going to be ready to play right away, having not played in any competitive action in quite some time. It might take him a little time to get more up to full game shape, game speed, but it's possible they could take Travis Homer or Larry Borum off of injured reserve here and have them ready to go for the game to give them some more depth on the offensive line and in the backfield. Worth noting that Tyreek Stevenson, the other corner, has been limited both days at practice with a calf injury. And that's one where limited can mean anything from 1% participation to 99% participation. If you're not full, then you're limited. And if you participate a little bit, but you're not out, then you're limited. So limited can mean a little bit, and limited can mean a lot. And it's hard to get a sense of what his status might be. But I think the fact that he hasn't had a full missed practice suggests that he should be better and ready to go in Washington. So the main missing components will be one of your safeties and your slot cornerback. Everybody else should be out there at close to 100%, even if not full strength. So then if I'm Kliff Kingsbury and I'm game planning for the Chicago Bears, I am throwing at the backup slot cornerback, and I'm throwing at the backup safety more than I'm throwing at the starting safety or the starting cornerbacks around those backups there. Like, I don't think I'm targeting Jalen Johnson very much when I think Josh Blackwell is probably, certainly more vulnerable than Jalen Johnson, and also, Tyreek Stevenson on the other side. Like, you're gonna go after those guys more than Jalen Johnson, and you're gonna go after Elijah Hicks more than Kevin Byard, who's also having a great season. So I would expect to see Kliff Kingsbury try to dial some things up that way. So if I'm Matt Eberflus, then I'm responding by making sure that I'm not giving Washington easy, predictable opportunities to attack those guys. That, yeah, you can try and draw some things up to attack Elijah Hicks at safety, but you don't know exactly where Elijah Hicks is going to be on every play in coverage. Because some plays he's going to be a single deep safety, some plays he's going to be up in the box, some days he's going to be a half field safety. And if you can mix up your coverages enough and not make it predictable to where, okay, we know Hicks is going to keep being the single deep safety over and over again, so we're going to attack deep up the middle of the field, like switch that up and put Byard in there and sometimes so that, Kliff Kingsbury calls the play from the sideline, not knowing for sure where Hicks is going to be on a play. So you can kind of guess and try and say, okay, we think he's probably going to be here, so we should try and attack that spot, and then he's somewhere else. Well, then, okay, you have the ability to check the play into something that's going to attack Hicks, or at some point you just kind of have to play your offense and just look for the matchups where you can find them, but you can't just focus your entire offense on attacking a couple individual players. Like, you can try and throw at the slot, but okay, if you stick the slot cornerback in some zones then, and you have linebackers and cornerbacks around him that can be nearby to assist in coverage and play a little bit tighter to that side, it becomes a sort of back and forth of where you're going to attack these players. And Matt Eberflus might blitz Josh Blackwell from the slot a few times because he likes to blitz the slot cornerback. Well, then you're not attacking that slot defender in coverage because he's not even in coverage anymore. So, right, you can play this back and forth of trying to attack these guys. And I think the way you'll see Kliff Kingsbury do it more is with misdirection and trying to have a lot of pre-snap motion and, fake a jet sweep handoff and then turn and play action off of that. So the defensive players have to read and react, and that maybe you trust more experienced players like Brisker and Gordon to read that properly, but because Hicks and Blackwell don't play as much on defense, they might not be as quick to react and as sharp and might not have the instincts as refined as your starting caliber players, so that then those guys become a step behind so that the quarterback can find the matchups. And you can trust that, yes, it's not Jayden Daniels, but it is Marcus Mariota, who's a veteran quarterback. Hard to believe Marcus Mariota is almost 32 years old now, 31, 32 in the NFL. He doesn't feel like he's been in the league that long, but he's been around the block. He knows how to attack defenders that might be confused in misdirection. Like, he's going to be a smart quarterback with the ball and can take advantage of any kind of misstep that a backup corner or a backup safety might take out in this game. So that's what's going to be fun to watch is what Eberflus does to try and mask some of the deficiencies that might have come from injuries, and what Kliff Kingsbury is going to do to try and take advantage of it. I don't mean to completely ignore the Bears offense against the Commanders defense on this episode, but I think the Kingsbury-Eberflus coaching matchup is more interesting than the Shane Waldron-Dan Quinn matchup, which is not uninteresting at all in its own right, but I think the Kliff stuff with Caleb is what's more fun. And I think we kind of have a sense that, like, the Commanders defense is mediocre, and the Bears offense is a lot better, but is not the strength. But, like, the strength of the Commanders is their offense, and the strength of the Bears is their defense. So the strength versus strength is going to be the fun part to watch, as opposed to, like, yes, the Bears offense, we're expecting them to have another good game against this Commanders defense, and there's plenty we could break down from there, but we only have so much time on each of these podcast episodes, and also the injuries are more present on the Bears defense. So that's why I wanted to focus a little bit more on that side of the ball today. Whatever happens in this Bears-Commanders game, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Don't forget to check out our new Locked On Bears postcast. After the Commanders game, we're going to try and get things rolling here with a live stream to break down everything we saw in the game. It'll be fun to see how Joe breaks this thing down after the game. We're going to get him on the podcast as well here some point in the next week, just to kind of get you a little bit more introduced to him and kind of get some of his Bears takes to bouncing up. But Joe George is going to do a great job with those postcasts. He's always been a true, like, radio pro here. So happy to have him as part of the Locked On Bears postcast here. He's going to be doing postcasts for postgame for all your favorite Chicago sports. He'll be doing Locked On Bulls postcasts as well. I'm assuming Blackhawks and some of the baseball teams when those come back around. So plenty more coming your way on Locked On Bears. We'll still do a Locked On Bears breakdown of Washington Commanders game for Monday's podcast, so we'll be there for you as well. And of course, each time we'll give you another opportunity to bear down.